Hello guys, my name is Pratyush Jain, and in this demo video, we are going to discuss the topic of emergency. We are going to cover some basics of emergency, and then we are going to take an overview on national emergency. As you know very well that emergency is a very important topic in prelims as well as mains exam for your civil services examination. So a good understanding of this topic is very important. So with that, let us start. So the first question that comes into our minds while reading about emergency is, what is emergency? If we talk in very simple terms, we can say emergency is a severe situation. Emergency is a crisis which requires some immediate action, which requires some quick response, some urgent response. So we say that emergency is a severe situation which requires some immediate action. The next thing that comes into our minds, the next question is, why was there a need for emergency provisions? Why did the constitutional makers felt that we needed these emergency provisions? For that, we must understand the historical context. We were a recently independent nation. We had zero to limited experience in terms of governing a nation, in terms of running a government, in terms of managing people. So we were a novice nation. We had a lot of riots, a lot of aggressions. Along with independence also came partition. So we had a lot of communal tensions. We had a lot of communal riots. We also had a lot of separatist tendencies. During independence, we had a lot of princely states, around 562 princely states. A lot of them were not very eager to join India, like Hyderabad, like Junagadh, like Jammu and Kashmir. They were not very eager to cede to India. We were also very poor, underdeveloped, which made us vulnerable to outside attacks. So we were a vulnerable nation, vulnerable to outside attacks and to internal instabilities. So to handle such situations efficiently, these provisions were needed. To safeguard the integrity, unity, security of India, these provisions were needed. We understood why we needed these provisions then, but why do we need them today? The context today has changed. The nature of problems have always also changed. But we still need a safety valve against any unpredictable threats. We still need a fail-safe against these unpredictable threats. We still have issues like Khalistan. We have issues like Kashmir, like left-wing extremism. We have geopolitical challenges like border issues with China, border issues with Pakistan. So the basic context is, whenever we have a situation or whenever there is a situation of national crisis or a situation of level of national crisis, we need these emergency provisions as a safety valve to handle these situations efficiently, effectively. That's why we need these provisions even today. Now, the next thing that we discuss is types of emergency. Types of emergency. If we look at our constitution, the emergency provisions are mentioned in part 18 of our constitution under articles 352 to article 356. These emergency provisions are mentioned. Now, in the constitution, there are three types of emergency that are mentioned. The first is national emergency. This is also the emergency that we are going to cover in our video today. It is mentioned under article 352. If emergency is imposed on the grounds of war, external aggression or armed rebellion, we call it national emergency. There are two more types of national emergency that are mentioned in the constitution. The first is commonly known as or popularly known as President's Rule. It is the most popular emergency in India. Basically, it has been used the most times in India. It is mentioned under article 356. When a state fails to follow the constitutional directions, when there is a failure of constitutional machinery in state, this emergency is imposed. Failure of constitutional machinery in state, this emergency is imposed. The third is financial emergency. and it is mentioned under Article 360. If emergency is imposed due to a threat on financial stability or credit of India, basically there is a financial threat to India, this emergency can be imposed. So far in India, it has not been imposed even once. So financial emergencies is still unused in India. So we have covered the three types of emergencies mentioned in the Constitution. Now let us start with our main topic, national emergency. So the first head that we discuss in national emergency is its proclamation. Who proclaims it? So under Article 352, President of India declares national emergency, or President of India can proclaim national emergency if security of India or a part of it is under threat. So if India's security or a part of it, or a security of a part of it is under threat, President can impose national emergency. Now, obviously, we're talking about a national level threat, or a level that is almost national level threat, right? So the president cannot just sit and wait for the threat to happen, for the threat to occur. He cannot say that let the threat occur first, or only after that I will impose emergency. That obviously logically that cannot happen. So the president can proclaim it, the national emergency, even before the actual occurrence of the given threat, if he is satisfied that there is an imminent danger. So if the president is satisfied that there is an imminent danger to security of India or a part of it, he can impose national emergency even before the occurrence of the given threat. Now, after 42nd Amendment, Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976, President can limit the operation of national emergency to a specified part of India. Before 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, if President proclaimed national emergency, it was automatically proclaimed for entire India. It automatically covered entire India. But because of 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, President now has the power to limit the operation of national emergency to a specified part of India. He can now limit the scope of national emergency only to some states or even part of a single state. He does not have to necessarily proclaim it for entire India. Another thing is, by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, the national emergency can only be proclaimed on the basis of a written recommendation of Union Cabinet. Written recommendation of Union Cabinet. When in 1975 emergency was imposed, the Prime Minister verbally communicated to the President that, all right, we feel that national emergency is needed in India, you impose it. So only a verbal communication was enough. But because of the nature in which these emergency provisions were used, the later government felt that there was a need for the government to be more accountable, to be more responsible on the grounds on which emergency is being proclaimed, the reasons for which the Prime Minister or the government feels that emergency is needed. So they decided that a written recommendation of Cabinet is needed for emergency to be proclaimed. So the president now needs a written recommendation. A verbal communication is not enough anymore. Another thing you should note that when we talk about president's satisfaction, if he is satisfied that there is an imminent danger, we are not talking about the president's satisfaction per se. We are talking about the Union Cabinet satisfaction. And after 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, we are talking about the written satisfaction of the Union Cabinet. So if the Union Cabinet writes to the president recommending emergency, the president will impose emergency. It is their satisfaction in writing. Next, we talk about grounds on which national emergency is proclaimed. So now there are three grounds on which national emergency is proclaimed. One is war, second is external aggression, and third is armed rebellion. Now you must understand the difference between war and external aggression. There are two main differences between them. One is war is always two-sided. There are two or more than two nations or entities at war. So war is at least two-sided. Whereas external aggression is generally only one-sided. One country is aggressing upon the other. One entity is aggressing upon the other. China is aggressing upon India, for example. So war is always at least two-sided, whereas external aggression is one-sided. Another difference is war is officially declared. Nation A officially declares war on Nation B. Nation B officially declares war on Nation A. War is officially declared. Whereas in case of external aggression, there is no such official declaration. It just happens. The third ground is armed rebellion. Originally, it was internal disturbance, but it was later replaced by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act to armed rebellion. So internal disturbance was replaced by armed rebellion via 44th Constitutional Act. This is the ground that was used in 1975 to impose emergency, internal disturbance. So it was felt by the later government that a more clear ground, a clarity is needed. Internal disturbance as a word, as a term is a little too vague. So a little more clarity is needed. So they replaced it with armed rebellion. Now we are talking about a rebellion that is armed, that is by nature violent. Now the next thing is, in case emergency is proclaimed on these two grounds, war and external aggression. In case emergency is proclaimed on based of these two grounds, it is called as external emergency. Whereas if emergency is proclaimed on the basis of armed rebellion, we call it as internal emergency. We call it as internal emergency. That is why you will also read sometimes that the emergency proclaimed in 1975 is also referred to as internal emergency, because it was declared on this ground, internal disturbance. Because it was declared on the basis of this ground, it is also sometimes referred to as internal emergency. So in national emergency, we define external emergency and internal emergency based on the ground on which it is imposed. Now we have discussed about the proclamation. We have discussed about the ground. Let us now discuss the process of parliamentary approval and the duration for which national emergency lasts. Now, after the president proclaims national emergency, this proclamation goes to the parliament. This proclamation goes to the parliament. And the parliament, both the houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they must approve this proclamation within 1 month of the date of issue. So if the president today proclaims national emergency, the parliament has 1 month from now, from this date, to approve this proclamation, to approve this issue of national emergency. And it must approve this by a special majority. By a special majority. Special majority is basically 50% of total membership of the house plus 2/3 of members present and voting. So both the houses must approve this proclamation by a special majority and within 1 month from the date of issue by the president. If either of these conditions fail, the proclamation stands failed. The emergency is revoked. In case both the houses pass this proclamation within 1 month and by a special majority, so emergency stands to be approved and it lasts for 6 months. For 6 months from the date of its approval, it lasts for 6 months from the date of its approval by the latter house. If Lok Sabha approves it first and Rajya Sabha approves it later, so from the date Rajya Sabha has approved it, from that date for 6 months, this emergency is imposed in the nation. And it can be extended for an indefinite time. Emergency can go on for infinite time with similar approvals every 6 months. So every 6 months, approvals are needed in the similar fashion as mentioned above, and these approvals can be given for an infinite amount of time. Now suppose the president proclaims emergency. It comes to the parliament, and before approving it, the Lok Sabha gets dissolved. So in case such a situation occurs, the proclamation survives for 30 days. The proclamation survives for 30 days from the first sitting of the new Lok Sabha. So till the new Lok Sabha has its first sitting, the proclamation will survive. The emergency will be in operation. And from the day the new Lok Sabha has its first sitting, this proclamation will survive for 30 days from then. So the new Lok Sabha will also get 30 days to approve or reject this proclamation of national emergency, provided in the meantime it has already been approved by the Rajya Sabha. So if the president today approves national emergency, within 1 month Rajya Sabha must approve it. In case within that month Lok Sabha gets dissolved, so from the day the new Lok Sabha will have its first sitting, the new Lok Sabha will have its first sitting. From that day, for 30 more days, the proclamations will survive, so that the new Lok Sabha has the time, the adequate time to discuss it and in case approve it. So this is a diagrammatic representation how the process works. The president proclaims emergency. It goes to the parliament, which has 1 month to clear it. It must be cleared by a special majority. It lasts for 6 months. It can be reapproved for an infinite number of times by the same process, every time by a special majority by the parliament. In case the Lok Sabha gets dissolved before approving or reapproving it, the proclamation will survive for 30 days from the first sitting of new Lok Sabha. So this is how the procedure and the duration works. Now, obviously, we have talked about the process of its approval. So we must also talk about the process of its revocation. How national emergency can be revoked. So the first method by which the national emergency can be revoked is by the president. If the president feels, and by the president feeling, we simply mean the cabinet feels, if the president feels that there is no more need for a national emergency, that national emergency should now be removed, he will simply issue a new proclamation saying that, all right, from now national emergency has been revoked and the national emergency will be revoked. So by president on a proclamation, national emergency can be revoked. No parliamentary approval is needed. Parliament is not needed here at all. Now, by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, another method for its revocation was added. If 1/10 of total members of Lok Sabha give a written notice to the speaker, if 1/10 of total members of Lok Sabha write to the speaker, or in case the Lok Sabha is not in session, to the president. If the Lok Sabha is in session, they will write to the speaker. If it is not in session, they will write to the president. A special sitting of Lok Sabha is held within 14 days. From the day they write the notice, within 14 days, a special sitting of Lok Sabha is held. And if in that sitting, Lok Sabha by a simple majority passes a resolution disapproving the continuation of national emergency, the president must revoke the proclamation. So 1/10 of members of Lok Sabha write to the speaker or the president in case there is the Lok Sabha is not in session. A special sitting of Lok Sabha is held within 14 days. In that sitting, if by a simple majority, Lok Sabha passes a resolution disapproving a national emergency or discontinuing national emergency, then the president revokes the proclamation. This method was added by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. So now the parliament also has some say or also has a method to revoke national emergency. Now the next topic under national emergency is effects on center-state relationships. What are the effects of national emergency on center-state relationships? We divide this topic into three parts: effects on executive relations, legislative relations, and financial relations. First, let us discuss the executive relations. In case of national emergency, the state government is not suspended. The state government still remains. It is still functioning as normal. But now it is under complete control of central government. In normal days, the state government has some say. It has some areas which are under its control. The central government only has limited power on state government. It can only issue directions on limited matters. State government can say no. State government can say that this is not your area, that this is not your business. This is our business. Our business is our business, none of your business. But during national emergency, that is not the case. State government cannot say no. Central government has complete control over state government. It can issue directions. It can issue directions to state government on any matter. The next is legislative relations. Here also, legislative assembly is not suspended. It is still there. It can still pass laws. It can still make laws. But parliament now can override legislative assembly even on state list matters. So even on items mentioned in state list, parliament can now make laws. And those laws can override laws made by legislative assembly. In case the emergency ceases, so whatever laws were made by the parliament on state subject, they become inoperative 6 months after emergency ceases. So if emergency is revoked today, so whatever laws that were made by the parliament on state subjects, only we are talking about laws only that are made on state subjects by the parliament. In case such laws are there, they will stop operating or they will cease to operate 6 months from today. And the last is financial relations. Obviously, we are talking about a national level emergency. So we are dealing with a national level threat. So to deal with that, the union government will need all the resources there are available, including money, including revenue. So for that, the president has the power to modify revenue distribution between center and state. He can modify the revenue distribution. He can lower the revenues or he can cancel the revenues towards state if he feels there is a need, subject to parliament's approval. Subject to parliament's approval, the revenue distribution can be modified by the president. And these changes, whatever these changes were, they will continue till the end of financial year in which emergency ceases. Till the end of financial year in which emergency ceases. So even if emergency ceases today, these changes will remain effective till the end of this financial year. They will not stop operating today or 6 months later, but till the end of financial year, this financial year, they will still operate. So these were the effects on center-state relations during a national emergency. Now let us talk about effects of national emergency on fundamental rights. For this, we can summarize these effects under two articles, Articles 358 and Articles 359. Under Article 358, What Article 358 says is that when national emergency is proclaimed, the 6 fundamental rights under Article 19, the 6 fundamental rights that are mentioned under Article 19, they are automatically suspended. So when national emergency is proclaimed, the Article 19 is automatically suspended. There is no parliamentary approval needed for that. So parliament is not needed for that. The Article 19 stands automatically suspended. Under Article 359, the president by order can suspend enforcement. Enforcement, not the fundamental right itself, but its enforcement. Here enforcement is a keyword. Under Article 358, the fundamental right itself was suspended. Whereas under Article 359, the fundamental rights are not suspended. Only their enforcement is suspended. So president by order can suspend enforcement of any or all fundamental rights except Article 20 and 21 subject to parliamentary approval. So under Article 358, Article 19 is suspended. It is automatically suspended. Parliament is not needed at all. Under Article 359, president, whatever article, it covers all the fundamental rights except Article 20 and 21. President by order can suspend them. They are not automatically, their enforcement is not automatically suspended. President by order can suspend them. It is subject to parliamentary approval. So the first provision in both these articles are covered. The second is under Article 358, Article 19 is suspended for entire duration of emergency and for entire country. So Article 19 is suspended automatically suspended as soon as national emergency is proclaimed, and it remains suspended for the entire duration. Even in case national emergency is proclaimed only for a limited part of the country, only for a specified part of the country and not for the entire country, Article 358 will operate for entire country. So Article 19 will stand suspended for entire country even in that case. So for entire duration and for entire country. Whereas under Article 359, enforcement can be suspended for entire duration or shorter period, and for entire country or only a part of it as specified by the president. So whatever the president feels, if he feels it should be suspended for the entire duration, it will be suspended. Its enforcement will be suspended. If he feels for a shorter duration, that is also okay. If he feels for the entire country, then for the entire country. If he feels only for a part of it, then only for a part of it. The third point is Article 358 operates only in case of external emergency. So Article 19 can be suspended only in case of war or external aggression and not in case of armed rebellion. Whereas under Article 359 can operate in case of both external as well as internal emergency. So whether it is war, external aggression or armed rebellion, Article 359 can operate on all the three grounds. Now, the last thing that we discuss in national emergency is whether national emergency is under judicial review or not. Can national emergency be judicially reviewed? So initially, by 38th Constitutional Amendment Act, national emergency was made immune from judicial review. The government said that national emergency cannot be judicially reviewed. It has immunity from it. But by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, national emergency was made subject to judicial review. So it could be reviewed by the judiciary by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. Also in Minerva Mills case of 1980, Supreme Court upheld that national emergency is subject to judicial review. So Supreme Court also agreed in Minerva Mills case that judiciary has the power to review national emergency, and it can be challenged in case it is found malified or based off on based on irrelevant on absurd facts. So if the facts are irrelevant, absurd, or if it is malified, it can be judicially reviewed. So national emergency is under judicial review. Now there are also some points to remember that are important. The first is that emergency provisions are taken from Government of India Act 1935. So emergency provisions are lifted from the Government of India Act 1935. Whereas suspension of fundamental rights, these provisions are taken from the German Constitution. So emergency provisions are taken from Government of India Act 1935, whereas provisions related to suspension of fundamental rights during emergency are taken from German Constitution. So far, there have been 3 declarations for national emergency. The first was during 1962 to 1968 because of Chinese aggression in NEFA, Northeast Frontier Agency. The second was during 1971 to 77 because of attack by Pakistan. We had a war with them. And the third was during 1975 to 1977 due to internal disturbance. This is the most controversial emergency so far. This is the reason why we have emergency as a hot topic in India. This is most controversial. This is also known as internal emergency. One thing that you should note here is that an emergency was already in place during 1971 to 77 when another was imposed. So to proclaim an emergency, it is not necessary that there should be no proclamation already running. It can happen that already there is a proclamation of national emergency in place and another national emergency proclamation is made. This is a summary for all the topics that we discussed in the national emergency. Who proclaims it, on what grounds it is proclaimed, its approval and duration, revocation, effects on center-state relationships, effects on fundamental rights, and whether it is under judicial review or not. So this is a summarized table for all that. So with that, we have come to an end of our demo video. I hope I was able to cover all the important relevant information in this topic. Thank you.